My name is Maxwell, and if you've ever poured your life into a job only to be shown the door, then you know exactly how this story starts. So pull up a chair and let me tell you how it ends. If you appreciate stories where competence gets the last laugh, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It lets me know I'm not the only one out there who believes in a little thing called professional karma. It started, as these things so often do, with a calendar invitation. 15 minutes, titled simply Organizational Update. The sender was Ronan, my boss, or, more accurately, the man who had been my boss for the last 18 months. Before him, it was a guy named Frank, a man who understood our business down to the bolts and alloys. Ronan understood spreadsheets. He had an MBA from a school that was very proud of its tuition fees and a vocabulary peppered with words like synergy, right-sizing, and optimizing verticals. To him, the company wasn't a living, breathing thing made of people and processes I'd spent 2 decades building. It was a set of numbers to be squeezed until they bled black ink. I walked into the conference room, the one with the perpetually flickering fluorescent light that facilities never quite got around to fixing. Ronan was there, sitting at the head of the long, polished table, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was a size too tight in the shoulders. Next to him was a woman from Human Resources I'd never seen before. She had a tight, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes, and a folder laid perfectly square in front of her. I knew in that instant, you work in corporate America for 24 years. You learn to recognize the posture of an executioner. I sat down. The air was thick with unspoken words. Ronan cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. He couldn't quite meet my eye. He started with the usual platitudes, my years of service, my invaluable contributions. He sounded like he was reading a eulogy for a man he'd never met. Then came the pivot. The market was changing. Headwinds, the need for a leaner, more agile operational structure. The words were meaningless, a corporate smokescreen designed to obscure the simple, brutal truth. Finally, he landed the plane. So, as a result of these necessary budgetary adjustments, he said, his gaze finally flicking to my face for a fraction of a second, we've had to make the difficult decision to eliminate your position, effective immediately. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. I watched the slight tremor in his hand as he pushed the folder across the table toward me. I watched the HR woman's smile remain frozen in place, a mask of professional indifference. Eliminate my position. I was the director of supply chain logistics for Orion Dynamics. We designed and built high-stress components for the aerospace and defense sectors. My position wasn't a line item, it was the circulatory system of the entire company. I had personally built our relationships with every single one of our key material suppliers, from the big smelters in Germany to the niche composite weavers in Japan. I had negotiated contracts on 3 continents, often over a handshake and a glass of something strong, building a network of trust that a spreadsheet could never quantify. Ronan seemed to be waiting for an outburst, for me to yell or plead or demand an explanation. He had his defenses ready, his corporate-approved script loaded, but I gave him nothing. I just nodded slowly. I'd seen this coming, not in its specifics, but in its inevitability. Ever since Ronan arrived, he'd treated my institutional knowledge not as an asset, but as a threat. He couldn't understand it, so he resented it. He mistook loyalty for weakness. I opened the folder, the standard severance agreement. A few weeks' pay for every year of service, but capped. A non-disclosure agreement as thick as a novel. And a note about my pension, which I was just 3 years away from fully qualifying for. It was all clinically, brutally efficient. I understand, I said. My voice was calm, even. It seemed to unnerve him more than any shouting match could have. Right. Good, he stammered, getting to his feet. Well, Maxwell, it's just business, you understand. We have to streamline for shareholder value. Shareholder value, the final, meaningless absolution for any corporate sin. I stood up, left the folder on the table, and looked him in the eye. For the first time, he held my gaze. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not guilt, fear. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about budgets, this was about something else. He had security escort me from the building. A young man barely out of his teens, looking apologetic, walked me back to my office. I was allowed 5 minutes to gather my personal effects, my family photos, the ridiculous world's best dad mug my daughter gave me, a small, heavy model of a turbine blade forged from an alloy I had helped develop a decade earlier. As I boxed them up, I could feel the eyes of my team on me. Good people, people I had hired, mentored, and fought for. They looked confused, scared. If the company could do this to me, what chance did they have? As the security guard walked me to the exit, past the reception desk with the gleaming Orion Dynamics logo I had once been so proud of, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It wasn't resignation, it was something colder, something harder. Ronan thought he had eliminated a position. He thought he had cut a salary. What he had really done was sever the one connection that held his entire operation together. And he had no idea. He had just handed me a match, and I was standing in a forest of his own making, filled with dry kindling. The walk to my car in the parking lot felt like the longest walk of my life. Each step was a metronome counting out the 24 years I had given that company. I remembered starting as a junior buyer, learning the ropes from old-timers who smelled of coffee and machine oil. I remembered the all-nighters, the frantic calls to customs officials in foreign ports, the thrill of landing a critical shipment just in time to prevent a line from shutting down. I remembered getting married, the birth of my 2 kids, the life I had built on the foundation of that steady, reliable job. It wasn't just a career, it was the backdrop to my entire adult life. I slid into the driver's seat and just sat there for a long time, the cardboard box of my office life on the passenger seat beside me. The engine was off. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning in the parking garage and the frantic, chaotic drumming of my own heart. The professional composure I had maintained in that conference room began to crack, and the full weight of the betrayal crashed down on me. It wasn't the loss of the job itself, not really. It was the callousness of it, the sheer naked disrespect, eliminated, like a redundant line of code. My mind kept replaying Ronan's face, that flicker of fear in his eyes. Why? Why was he afraid? A simple layoff, even a brutal one, didn't warrant that look. It was the look of a man with a secret, a man who needed me gone for a reason far more specific than budgetary concerns. And then it hit me. Aero Composites. Our main supplier for high-grade carbon fiber and specialized resins. They were our exclusive partner, a deal Ronan himself had championed about a year ago, shortly after he arrived. He had pushed it through, citing the benefits of a single-source supplier, streamlining procurement, creating synergy. I had argued against it. Putting all our eggs in one basket was a strategic blunder. I knew the market. I knew we could get comparable or even superior materials from at least 3 other vendors for a better price. But Ronan had been adamant. He had framed my resistance as being old school, not forward-thinking. He had overruled me, and the board, trusting his shiny MBA, had backed him. For the past year, I had watched the invoices from Aero Composites come in. They were always high, consistently, stubbornly high. When I'd raised this with Ronan, he'd waved it off. "It's the price of exclusivity, Max," he'd said, with that infuriatingly condescending tone. "We get priority access, top-tier materials. It's a premium product. You can't put a price on that kind of reliability." "But you can. Of course you can. That's my entire job." The anger began to burn through the shock, a clean, hot flame. I started the car and drove home, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I walked into the house and my wife, Sarah, took one look at my face and the box in my hands and knew. She didn't say what happened. She just wrapped her arms around me, and for a moment I let myself lean into her strength, the solid, unwavering center of my world. After I told her everything, the whole sordid 15-minute meeting, she wasn't just sympathetic, she was furious. "That little snake," she said, her voice tight, "after everything you've done for them." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a racetrack of hypotheticals and unanswered questions. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up, went downstairs and walked into my workshop. It's my sanctuary, a place of order and precision in a world that often lacks both. The walls are lined with tools, each in its proper place. In the center of the room, held in a jig, was my current project, a custom bicycle frame. It was a complex build, using a mix of carbon fiber tubing and 3D printed titanium lugs. It required patience, meticulous attention to detail, and an understanding of how different materials behave under stress. It was, in many ways, a microcosm of my life's work. I picked up a file and began to gently shape one of the titanium joints. The rhythmic scrape of metal on metal was calming. As I worked, my thoughts began to organize themselves. Ronan's fear, the Aero Composites deal, the inflated prices, the pieces were all there, floating in the ether. I just needed to put them together. For years, I had kept a personal backup of my most critical work files on an encrypted hard drive at home. It wasn't malicious. It was a habit born from surviving 3 different corporate server crashes and a near-catastrophic data loss in the early 2000s. It was my professional insurance policy. Company policy was a bit of a gray area on this, a debatable point about intellectual property, but my logic was simple. I was paid to ensure the supply chain never broke, and this was one of my tools. Now it was something else entirely. It was an archive. I left the workshop, went to my home office, and plugged in the drive. The files spooled up, a ghost of my former professional life. I pulled up the procurement data for the last 5 years. I isolated every transaction with our materials suppliers. Then I opened a separate folder containing market analysis reports I had compiled over the years, tracking the commodity prices of everything from aluminum ingots to the specific grades of carbon fiber we used. I started building a new spreadsheet, not one for Ronan, but one for me. I put Orion's contracted prices from Aero Composites in one column. In the next, I put the average market rate for the same materials over the same period, sourced from my own data and cross-referenced with publicly available industry indices. The numbers were stark. It wasn't just a small premium for exclusivity. It was a consistent across-the-board markup of between 28 and 32%, week after week, month after month. It was a massive, systematic overcharge. No legitimate business operates that way. A premium for quality might be 5, maybe 10% in a niche market. 30% wasn't a premium, it was a theft. My hands felt cold. This was bigger than I thought. Ronan hadn't just made a bad deal. A bad deal is incompetence. This was calculated. This had to be a kickback. Ronan was getting a slice of that 30% skim, paid directly by someone at Aero Composites, in exchange for locking Orion into an absurdly inflated, exclusive contract. And he had fired me because I was the only person in the company with the knowledge and the backbone to question it. He hadn't eliminated a position. He had eliminated a witness. The catalyst wasn't just the discovery, though. It was the insult of the severance package sitting on my kitchen table. They were stealing millions from the company, from the shareholders Ronan claimed to serve, and they were tossing me a few weeks' pay to shut me up and send me on my way. They thought I would just take it, fade away quietly, another undervalued veteran put out to pasture. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it, and they had just lost it. That was the moment the resolve hardened in my chest, turning from hot anger into something cold and dense like tempered steel. This wasn't about getting my job back. I wouldn't work for a man like Ronan, or a board that enabled him for another second. This wasn't even about revenge, not in a petty sense. It was about balance. It was about restoring a professional equilibrium that had been corrupted by greed. It was about proving that integrity has its own kind of value, a value that Ronan and his ilk could never comprehend. I went back to my desk and started digging through a different set of files, contact lists from industry conferences, old business cards, notes scribbled on hotel stationery. I was looking for one name in particular. It took me almost an hour, but I finally found it on the back of a cocktail napkin from a reception in Frankfurt 4 years ago. Arthur Vance, CEO, Vance Global. Vance Global was the massive multinational conglomerate that had acquired Aero Composites about 2 years back. Arthur Vance was old school, a titan of the industry who had built his empire from the ground up. I had met him once, briefly. We'd had a 10-minute conversation about the future of composite materials in aviation. He was sharp, no nonsense, and he listened more than he talked. He was everything Ronan wasn't. And on that napkin next to his name was a phone number and a handwritten note. "Max, you know your stuff. If you ever need a real conversation, call my direct line." I looked at the number. This was the leverage, not a lawsuit, not a call to a regulator, which would get bogged down in bureaucracy for years. It was a direct line to the man at the very top of the food chain, the man whose subsidiary was being used as a personal piggy bank by a mid-level crook like Ronan. My plan began to form, not as a messy emotional outburst, but as a clean, elegant design, like the bicycle frame in my workshop. I wasn't going to accuse anyone of anything. I wasn't going to show Arthur Vance proof of a kickback, which would be my word against Ronan's. I was going to do what I do best. I was going to show him the numbers. I was going to present him with an unassailable, data-driven picture of a 30% inefficiency in one of his business units. And I was going to let him, a man who had built an empire on razor-thin margins and ruthless efficiency, draw his own conclusions. The first step was to build an ironclad case. My personal files were a good start, but they weren't enough. I needed fresh, undeniable, third-party data. I spent the next 2 days working my phone, not as Maxwell, the disgraced ex-director, but as Maxwell Sterling, independent consultant. I called 3 of Aero Composites' main competitors. I told them I was advising a private equity firm looking to invest in the aerospace manufacturing sector and that I needed to build a model of material costs. It was a plausible cover. People were happy to talk, to provide quotes and data sheets, hoping to get a foot in the door with a potential new source of capital. By the end of the week, I had a dossier. It was beautiful in its simplicity. It contained a 1-page summary of Orion's annual spend with Aero Composites. Behind it were 3 official, current-day quotes from their top competitors for the exact same volume and types of materials. The price discrepancy wasn't a matter of interpretation. It was a black-and-white fact, a multi-million-dollar gap that no excuse about premium service could possibly bridge. The final page was a simple line graph showing the market price of our main composite material over the last 2 years versus the price Aero Composites had been charging Orion. The 2 lines diverged like a Y, showing the precise moment Ronan's exclusive deal had kicked in. It was damning. While I was building my case, I made another call, this one to my old protege, David. David was a brilliant young engineer, sharp as a tack, who I had hired straight out of university 5 years ago. He was loyal, not just to the company, but to the principles of good work we had always shared. I knew I could trust him. "Max, are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. He was clearly worried about speaking to me. "I'm fine, David. Better than fine," I said. "Listen, I'm not asking you to do anything that would put you at risk. I just need to know what the weather's like in the office." He hesitated for a second, then the words came spilling out. It was chaos. Ronan had announced my departure in a bland all-hands email, and nobody bought the budgetary excuse for a second. Morale had cratered. Ronan had already brought in a new guy to be his main contact with Aero Composites, someone David described as a slick salesman in a shiny suit who didn't know the difference between carbon fiber and cardboard. He said Ronan was holding constant meetings about new paradigms and leveraging synergies, but nobody could get a straight answer from him about the immediate future of their material supply. "He's panicking, Max," David said. "He's trying to project control, but he's sweating. We've got a major order for the new drone project due in 6 weeks, and the material shipment schedule is a mess. He keeps saying his guy at Aero Composites has it handled, but it doesn't feel right." This was the subplot I needed, the internal confirmation. Ronan wasn't just corrupt, he was incompetent. His entire system was built on a single fragile point of failure, his relationship with his contact at the supplier. He had removed me, the institutional safety net, and now he was flying blind. "David," I said, "just keep your head down and your resume polished. Do good work. Don't worry about me." "They were fools to let you go, Max," he said, and I could hear the genuine anger in his voice. "Absolute fools." "Competence is a liability to men who have none," I replied. "Stay safe." The final piece of my plan was legal. I took my severance agreement and my non-compete clause to a lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Albright who specialized in employment law. She read through the documents, her expression grim. "This non-compete is laughably broad," she said, tapping the page. "It's practically unenforceable, especially since they terminated you without cause. It's a scare tactic, designed to keep you from going to a competitor. As for the severance, it's the bare minimum they could get away with. They're betting you'll just sign it and go away." "I have no intention of going away," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Good. Don't sign anything. Let it sit on the table. The longer you wait, the more nervous they get. What's your plan?" I didn't give her the specifics. I just told her I had identified some significant financial irregularities with a key supplier and that I intended to bring it to the attention of the supplier's parent company. "As a private citizen?" she asked. "As a concerned industry professional," I corrected her. She smiled, a genuine predatory smile this time. "Make sure your information is factual, objective, and presented, without accusation. Let them connect the dots. If they do decide to sue for breach of your NDA, the discovery process could be very, very interesting for them. I don't think they'll risk it." Her advice solidified my strategy. I wasn't an angry ex-employee seeking revenge. I was a consultant presenting a market analysis. The framing was everything. With my dossier complete, my insider confirming the internal chaos, and my legal position clarified, I was ready. I picked up the phone and dialed the number from the 4-year-old cocktail napkin. I half expected it to be disconnected, but it rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Vance." It wasn't a secretary. It was him. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Maxwell Sterling. We met a few years ago at a conference in Frankfurt. You and I spoke about composite matrix densities." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could picture him sitting in a leather chair high above some city, his mind sifting through thousands of similar encounters. "Sterling," he said, his voice clicking with recognition. "Orion Dynamics. You knew your materials, I remember. You're the one who told me the Japanese were 5 years ahead on pitch-based fiber. You were right." "I'm glad I made an impression," I said. "The reason I'm calling is that I'm no longer with Orion. I'm doing some independent consulting now, and I've come across some market data related to one of your subsidiaries that I believe you'd find illuminating. I was hoping I might be able to steal a half hour of your time." Another pause, longer this time. This was the critical moment. He could have brushed me off, told me to go through official channels, to talk to some mid-level drone in his sprawling organization. "Where are you based?" he asked. I told him. "I'll be in the city next Wednesday," he said. "My office will book a table for lunch, 12:30. The Capitol Grill. Be there." The line went dead. I hung up the phone and let out a long, slow breath. The gears were now in motion. The trap was set. All I had to do was walk in, present the facts, and let gravity do the rest. The day of the lunch arrived, a crisp, clear autumn day. I chose my suit carefully, not a power suit, but a well-tailored conservative gray one. I wanted to look like what I was, a serious, experienced professional. Not a whistleblower, not a victim, a man with valuable information. The Capitol Grill was exactly the kind of place I expected Arthur Vance to choose. Dark wood, hushed tones, the clink of heavy silverware on fine china. It was a place where fortunes were made and lost over a dry-aged steak and a bottle of expensive Cabernet. I was shown to a quiet corner booth. Arthur Vance was already there. He was older than I remembered, maybe in his early 70s, but his eyes were just as sharp, scanning the room with a practiced, assessing gaze. He stood as I approached, a gesture of old-school respect, and shook my hand. His grip was firm, his hand dry. "Sterling," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Good of you to come. Mr. Vance, thank you for making the time." We ordered. The small talk was brief and professional. He asked about my family. I asked about his flight. It was all a preamble, a ritual before the real business began. He didn't ask why I had left Orion, and I didn't offer. He was a man who respected privacy and likely assumed, correctly, that the story would reveal itself in due course. Once the waiter had taken our order and retreated, a palpable silence fell over the table. Arthur leaned forward slightly, folding his hands. "So," he said, his voice low and direct, "you have something illuminating for me." This was it. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the dossier. It was a simple, slim, black folder. I slid it across the table. "I want to be very clear, Mr. Vance," I began, my voice calm and measured. "I'm not here to make accusations or allegations. I'm no longer an employee of Orion Dynamics, and I have no horse in this race. However, during my transition into consulting, I was running some numbers as a case study, and I noticed a significant pricing anomaly with one of your companies, Aero Composites, specifically in their dealings with Orion." He didn't open the folder. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. "As you know," I continued, "I spent over 2 decades managing that supply chain. I know the market rates for these materials like the back of my hand. The prices Aero Composites has been charging Orion for the past 18 months are, to put it mildly, significantly out of sync with the rest of the industry." He slowly opened the folder. He read the one-page summary first, his eyes moving methodically down the list of figures. He didn't flinch, didn't show any surprise. He just absorbed the information. He turned the page to the competitor quotes, his gaze lingering on the bottom-line numbers. Then he turned to the final page, the graph, the 2 diverging lines that told the whole story. He stared at that graph for a full minute, the silence stretching out between us. The only sound was the distant murmur of other conversations in the restaurant. I let the silence work. I didn't add any commentary. I didn't try to interpret the data for him. The numbers spoke for themselves, a clear, cold language of inefficiency and waste. Or something worse. Finally, he looked up from the folder, his eyes locking onto mine. They were like chips of granite. "This graph," he said, tapping it with his index finger. "This divergence, it begins approximately 18 months ago." "Yes, sir. Roughly when Orion's new VP of Operations, a man named Ronan, finalized the exclusive supply agreement with your team. And your employment with Orion was terminated when?" "Last week," I said, "for budgetary reasons." A flicker of something crossed his face. Not surprise, understanding. A dark, cynical understanding that only comes from decades of navigating the treacherous waters of corporate politics. He knew exactly what this was. I hadn't needed to say the word kickback. The data I provided was the disease, and he was a master diagnostician. He could see the symptoms and knew the cause without me having to name it. He closed the folder and pushed it back toward me. "Keep it," he said. "This is your work product." He leaned back in his chair. Our steaks arrived, and for a few minutes we ate in silence. He wasn't angry. He was something far more dangerous. He was disappointed. He was a man who had built a global empire on a reputation for quality and ruthless efficiency, and he had just been shown a pocket of rot within his own organization. "You know your stuff, Sterling," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Just like I remembered. You were loyal to your company. I was loyal to the work," I corrected him gently. "The company changed." He nodded, a curt, sharp movement of his head. "That it did." He took a sip of his water. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention personally. You've shown a great deal of professional courtesy. I believe that bad data, like a bad weld, eventually leads to catastrophic failure," I said. "I prefer to point it out before the wing falls off the plane." A corner of his mouth twitched. the closest he came to a smile. Aptly put. The rest of the lunch was a blur of industry talk. He asked for my assessment of other players in the market, my thoughts on future material trends. It wasn't an interview, it was a consultation. By the time the check came, he had my entire professional history and my philosophy on supply chain management without ever having asked a direct question. As we stood to leave, he shook my hand again. "It was good to see you again, Maxwell," he said, using my first name for the first time. "I have a feeling we'll be speaking again soon." And that was it. I walked out of the restaurant, into the bright afternoon sun, feeling a profound sense of release. I had done my part. I had presented the truth in a way it could not be ignored. The silent takeover had begun. The consequences were no longer in my hands. I didn't have to wait long. The very next day, my phone rang. It was David. He sounded breathless, a mixture of shock and awe in his voice. "Max, you are not going to believe this," he stammered. An email just came down from Vance Global's corporate headquarters. A blanket announcement. The entire senior sales and account management team for Aero Composites' Eastern U.S. division has been terminated, effective immediately. Their head of sales, a guy named Marcus Thorne, Ronan's contact, was apparently escorted from the building this morning. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. Arthur Vance did not waste time. "That's not all," David continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Orion just received a certified letter via courier. Vance Global is terminating our exclusive supply contract, citing 19 material breach of fair market pricing agreements. They're exercising a clause in the contract Ronan must have overlooked. We have no primary supplier for carbon fiber, Max. As of right now, the pipeline is dry." The talent exodus I had predicted began less than a week later. It started with David. He called me on a Saturday morning. "I quit, Max," he said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "I walked in yesterday, gave my 2 weeks' notice. Ronan just stared at me. He didn't even try to talk me out of it. The place is a ghost ship. Everyone knows it's sinking. 3 of the other senior logistics guys are interviewing with competitors. You were the glue, Max. Without you, there's no trust. There's nothing holding it together. This is something the Ronans of the world never understand. They think a company is a collection of assets and processes that can be managed on a spreadsheet. They don't grasp that it's a human ecosystem built on relationships and shared trust. Once you poison that, the whole structure rots from the inside out. They mistook loyalty for something they owned, when in fact it was something I had built. 2 days after David quit, my phone rang again. The caller ID showed a name I never expected to see again, Ronan. I let it ring for a moment, then answered, putting it on speaker. "Maxwell," he said. His voice was strained, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. "Hey, buddy, how's the time off?" "It's productive, Ronan," I said calmly. Good to hear." He cleared his throat. "Listen, a crazy thing happened. You hear about Aero Composites?" "I might have seen something about it in the trade news," I said, keeping my voice flat and disinterested. "Yeah, crazy. They just cut us off, pulled the plug. Can you believe the nerve?" He was trying to frame it as if they were the victims. "So listen, I was thinking, we're in a bit of a jam here, and nobody knows the supplier landscape like you. What would you say to coming back on a short-term, high-rate consulting contract, just to help us bridge the gap?" The audacity was breathtaking. First, he fires me to protect his criminal enterprise. Then, when his scheme blows up in his face, he comes crawling back, asking me to clean up his mess. "I don't think so, Ronan," I said. His tone shifted instantly from wheedling to accusatory. The panic was starting to bleed through. "What did you do, Max? This all happened right after you left. This has your fingerprints all over it." "I had lunch, Ronan," I said, letting the simple, truthful statement hang in the air. "Lunch? Who did you have lunch with?" he demanded. "I don't believe that's any of your business," I said. "My consulting work is confidential." He snapped. "You're bound by a non-compete and an NDA. You can't just go sharing proprietary company information. I'll have our lawyers all over you. We'll sue you into the ground." This was the desperate countermove I had been waiting for. It was the last-ditch effort of a man with no cards left to play. "Ronan," I said, my voice dropping to a low, cold calm. "First, the non-compete is unenforceable, and we both know it. Second, I didn't share any of Orion's proprietary information. I shared publicly available market data. It's not my fault. Your exclusive deal couldn't stand up to a simple comparison. And third," I paused, letting the silence stretch, "if you want to proceed with a lawsuit, please, have your lawyers call mine. Her name is Miss Albright. I'm sure she would be absolutely fascinated to discuss your procurement strategies with Aero Composites during a discovery process. I imagine Orion's board of directors and shareholders would be too." There was dead silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the blood draining from his face. I had just called his bluff, and he knew with chilling certainty that my hand was better. The discovery process of a lawsuit would unearth everything: the bank records, the emails, the kickbacks. It would be his professional suicide note. He hung up without another word. The power shift was complete. He was no longer the hunter, he was the prey. And the wolves were closing in. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in corporate implosion, narrated to me in near real time by David and other former colleagues who had started reaching out. With the Aero Composites contract gone and no immediate replacement, Orion's production lines for their most profitable projects began to slow, then stop. Orders were delayed. Penalties for non-delivery began to stack up. Their largest client, a major defense contractor, put them on formal notice. The stock price, which Ronan was so obsessed with, began to slide. The board, who had blindly trusted Ronan's buzzwords and spreadsheets, finally woke up. They convened an emergency meeting. An internal audit was launched. It was like turning a rock over and watching the pale, soft-bodied things underneath scurry from the light. Then, about a month after my elimination, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Eleanor Vance, a senior board member at Orion Dynamics, and ironically, no relation to Arthur Vance. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman from the old guard who Ronan had systematically sidelined. "Maxwell," she said, her voice tired but firm, "I'm not going to waste your time with pleasantries. We made a catastrophic mistake. The board has terminated Ronan's employment, effective this morning. We're cleaning house." I didn't say anything, I just listened. "The damage is significant," she continued, "but we believe it's repairable. We need experienced leadership. We need someone who can rebuild the supply chain and restore trust with our partners and our clients. We need you, Maxwell. We'd like to offer you your old position back, with the title of Vice President of Operations. You would report directly to the board. You can name your salary." There it was, the vindication, the full circle moment where they came back, hat in hand, offering me everything I should have had in the first place. A year ago, I would have been thrilled by this offer. It would have been the culmination of my career. But I wasn't the same man I was a month ago. I had been pushed out of the nest, and I had discovered, much to my own surprise, that I could fly. "Eleanor," I said. And I was surprised by the lack of triumph in my own voice. It just felt quiet. "I appreciate the offer, I truly do, and I'm glad to see the board is taking corrective action, but I'm afraid I have to decline." There was a stunned silence on her end. "May I ask why?" "I've already accepted a new position," I said. I looked out my home office window at the quiet suburban street, the life that had been so profoundly shaken and then resettled on a new, stronger foundation. "With who?" she asked, a note of dread in her voice. "Vance Global," I replied. "Arthur Vance has asked me to build and lead a new internal division. It's called the Supplier Integrity and Relations Group. My first official task is a comprehensive top-to-bottom audit of all contracts held by their subsidiary companies. It seems Mr. Vance has a newfound appreciation for ensuring his partners are getting fair market value." I let that sink in, the beautiful, poetic justice of it. I wasn't just getting a new job, I was being put in a position of power over the very system that had been used to wrong me. I would be the gatekeeper, the auditor, the man who ensured that no other Ronin could ever skim from a Vance Global company again. I had not just won, I had rewritten the rules of the game. Eleanor was speechless for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was full of a weary resignation. "Well," she said, with a dry, humorless chuckle, "I can't say I blame you. Checkmate, Maxwell. Good luck to you. It seems we're the ones who are going to need it." We ended the call, and I sat there in the silence of my office. It was over. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the wild, chaotic joy of revenge. It was the clean, solid feeling of a problem solved, of a complex equation balanced. Ronan was a symptom of a disease, the kind of corporate rot that mistakes confidence for competence and loyalty for weakness. Firing him didn't cure the disease at Orion, it just removed one tumor. My new role, however, felt like preventative medicine. A few days later, I was in my workshop, applying the final clear coat to the bicycle frame. It was gleaming under the lights, a perfect fusion of high-tech materials and meticulous craftsmanship. The carbon fiber tubes were flawlessly smooth, the titanium lugs polished to a soft luster. I had taken a collection of disparate raw materials and, through patience and expertise, turned them into something strong, light, and beautiful. It was a metaphor I couldn't ignore. My phone buzzed. It was a text from David. It was a link to a short article in an industry trade publication. The headline read, "Orion Dynamics stock tumbles on supply chain crisis. Emergency loan sought." I read the first paragraph, which detailed their catastrophic quarterly losses and the ongoing executive turmoil. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel schadenfreude. I just felt a quiet sense of inevitability. This is what happens when you devalue competence. It's not a line item on a budget. It's the foundation of the entire structure. You can't remove it and expect the building to stand. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it all. And they had. This story, my story, isn't really about revenge, not in the end. It's about value. It's about knowing your worth when the people who sign your paychecks have forgotten how to measure it. Men like Ronan, they see the world in terms of assets they can control and costs they can cut. They don't understand that the most valuable things in any business are the ones that don't appear on a balance sheet. Trust, integrity, and deep, hard-won experience. They count on your silence. They count on your fear. They count on you to believe that you are disposable. For 24 years, I was a loyal company man. I believed in the name on the building. But when they pushed me out, they did me a favor. They forced me to realize that my loyalty shouldn't have been to Orion Dynamics. It should have been to my own skills, my own principles, and my own name. So if you're in a place where you feel overlooked, underestimated, or erased, remember this: your value isn't determined by a manager with a thesaurus of buzzwords. It's determined by what you can do, what you know, and the integrity with which you do it. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to simply take your value somewhere it will be appreciated. And sometimes, all it takes to change the world is to have lunch with the right person and show them the numbers. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you'd like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.